Hi everyone, thank you for having me today. So today I'm going to present to you a very interesting research of mine that I actually been working on for the last year and a half. And it's about a very sophisticated and very interesting threat actor that have been targeting governments in the Middle East and Africa. Before I start, let me quickly introduce myself. So my name is Lior Rochberger, and I'm a security researcher at the Cortex Threat Research Team in Palo Alto Networks, and I'm based in Israel. I have almost a decade of experience around this field. I have experience with malware analysis, threat hunting, reverse engineering, and in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been tracking various nation-state threat actors as well as cybercrime threat actors. So today in the agenda, I'm going to start with a background about how this whole research started. Then I'll dive into the main TTPs in each phase of the attack lifecycle. I will continue on to touch upon the attribution and using the diamond model of attribution to do that. And I'll finish off with a summary of the findings. And I really hope to leave a few minutes for questions. So let's get started. So in late 2022, I performed hunting in Alto telemetry, which is part of my day-to-day work. And soon after that, I started to notice suspicious activity coming from multiple sources. And all of them belonged to governmental entities from the Middle East and Africa. Of course, this immediately piqued my interest. So I further dived into the activity and continued to investigate it. And then I noticed that this activity actually consists of a very rare set of techniques, tools, and procedures. Some of those TTPs were never even mentioned anywhere before, and some were very rare and was mentioned only a few times in the past. Of course, this made me even more curious, so I continued the investigation and continued to analyze all the artifacts, and then I found that the motivation behind this attack was to perform a long-term espionage operation and to steal very sensitive information related to ongoing geopolitical events. Information about politicians, high-ranking individuals, military, and even geopolitical events that happened around the same time. And after taking into consideration all these artifacts, the level of sophistication of the threat actor, the adaptiveness, the victimology, and of course the motivation, it all kind of led me to assess that a nation-state threat actor is most likely behind this attack. But in order to really understand why this attack was so unique and so interesting, we have to go through each phase of the attack lifecycle and explore at least some of the main TTPs. So let's do it. Let's start with the beginning. Let's try to understand how the attackers even got to the environment in the first place. And to do that, we have to examine the infection vector. So initially, in order to penetrate the organization, the threat actor tried to exploit different known vulnerabilities of Exchange servers that do not require any type of authentication. For example, they tried to exploit the proxy shell and proxy logon vulnerabilities. But as you can see, they were quite unsuccessful in this. The servers were already patched. So at this point, they had to either change tactic or to use a different exploit. And indeed, shortly after that, we noticed that the threat actor kind of shifted their tactic and started to perform a brute force attack on the same Exchange server, with of course the hope of getting some sort of credentials. And once they did, they used these credentials to authenticate with the server, and they tried to install the notorious China Chopper web shell. But as you can see from the screen, they were quite unsuccessful in this either. And at this point, if they really wanted to penetrate this organization, if it's really that important for them, they really needed to come up with a new solution or a new way around it. And after almost 3 weeks of complete silence, the attackers returned to the network. And we started to getting these different alerts related to suspicious in-memory activity on the same Exchange server that was targeted before. And we soon realized that the attackers were able to execute in-memory VB scripts that allowed them to interact with Windows APIs, to run processes, to deliver additional payloads, and basically everything that you can expect out of a classic web shell. And at this point, we understood that we were dealing with a very determined, adaptive, and sophisticated threat actor. And using this relatively unique and pretty uncommon technique of running in-memory VB script to act as a web shell, the threat actor were able to penetrate the organization and to carry on their attack. And after penetrating the organization, the threat actor moved on to the next phase of the attack, the second phase, which is to perform some reconnaissance activity, gather information about the infrastructure, the users, and other critical assets. And as part of this activity, we noticed that the threat actor were specifically interested about information related to administrative users, and they also tried to identify different critical servers. They tried to identify web servers, SQL servers, FTP servers, and also Exchange servers. And in order to do that, they used a lot of different open source and publicly available tools, a lot of different scanners, including some custom scanners. And as you can see on the screen, they also, of course, use some Windows native tools and commands. And after gathering this information about the network, the threat actor moved on to the next phase, which is to gain some sort of elevated privileges in order to execute everything that they've planned. And as part of their attempt to perform this or to get elevated privileges, we saw that the threat actor tried to use different tools and techniques. They first tried to use the Potato Suite, which is a collection of Windows native privilege escalation tools that is available on GitHub and actually kind of gaining popularity in the last 2 years. They also tried to use an IS privilege escalation tool, which is called IS LPE, also available on GitHub. And interestingly, or should I say weirdly, they also tried to use the pretty old technique, which is known as the sticky keys attack. And I find it very strange, but apparently it's still a thing, and threat actor still use that. And after kind of failing to elevate their privileges, the threat actor shifting towards trying to harvesting credentials with, of course, the hope of getting some sort of administrative account. And this phase was very interesting for us to observe. We saw that the threat actor really tried to use a lot of different tools and techniques. They tried to force wdigest to store credentials in clear text. They tried to dump the NTDSD file, the same key hive, the ELSAS process. They used Mimikatz, procdump, search for locally stored passwords. And it really showed us how determined and how adaptive this threat actor really was, because they really tried to retool and to change tactic each time and to try to bypass different mitigation efforts. It also kind of gives us this glimpse to the whole cat and mouse game between adversaries and defenders. And I'm sure all of you are kind of familiar with all these techniques and tools. I mean, a lot of threat actors use that. But there was one technique that kind of stood out to us. And this technique was the abuse of the network providers in order to steal credentials. This technique is mostly known as a proof of concept by the name NPP spy. And we call it in Palo Alto Networks NTOS spy. And to the best of my knowledge, it was only reported used a handful of times in the past. So it's a pretty rare technique. And how it works. So basically, the threat actor drops a malicious DLL on disk. Then a new network provider is registered and is configured to load the malicious DLL. Later on in the login activity, WinLogon captures the username and password and forward them to another process, which is called MP-Notify. Then MP-Notify gets the credentials and loads the malicious DLL. In our case, this is the DLL the threat actor dropped. And later on, this DLL just creates a file on disk and then saves to it the stolen credentials, and the threat actor can just take this file, copy it, and send back to the C2. And after harvesting credentials, our threat actor moved on to the next phase, which is to try to gain additional foothold in the environment. Their motivation or their purpose was to perform long-term espionage operations, so they really wanted to make sure that they have additional foothold in the environment. And one of the first things that immediately piqued my interest in this specific phase is the attempt of the threat actor to execute this really large DLL file using a renamed RunDLL32 process, which is quite noisy on its own. And when I investigated this file, I noticed that it's actually a variant of the Ghostrat malware, which is pretty common. However, there was one really weird thing about this sample. So I found this very strange string in memory that you can see on the screen. It says game over, good luck by wind. So I thought it's really strange. So I, of course, Googled it, tried to see what it means or if it was mentioned anywhere before. And I actually found a pretty interesting connection. I found that this very weird string actually was mentioned back in 2015 in Operation Iron Tiger. And we need to keep in mind that this Operation Iron Tiger was published almost a decade ago. So it's not clear if this string in memory was an Easter egg planned by the threat actor or if it was a false flag. However, we still, of course, compare the different TTPs and try to see different connections between APT27 and our threat actor. And other than this string, we did not find any other striking resemblance to this threat actor. So we tried to focus on the infrastructure that this Ghostrat variant communicates with, which is this Microsoft ns1.com domain. And we started to perform hunting in our telemetry, and we started to search for additional processes that may communicate with this infrastructure. And we found that in addition to this Ghostrat malware that I just mentioned that communicates with this domain, we have additional 2 undocumented malware that communicates with the same infrastructure. And we named them Tunnel Specter and Sweet Specter. And unlike the Ghostrat sample that was executing using a renamed RunELL32 process, Tunnel Specter and Sweet Specter both were loaded or side-loaded into legitimate processes and loads an encrypted payload. And although each malware kind of differs from the other and is pretty unique on its own, we did find a slight code similarity between the 3, which led us to assess that it's actually a new malware family that we called it the Specter family, and that they are somehow connected to Ghostrat, so we decided that they are like cousins of Ghostrat. So the first malware that we discovered, Tunnel Specter, it seems that it was specifically crafted and created for the target. You can see here on the screen that this malware actually creates a user on the infected machine. And the sharp lad among you will notice that they try to mimic or to masquerade as the legitimate service user, but with a C instead of an A, which actually makes it relatively unique. And what was interesting in our case is that we found that the threat actor actually tried to create the same exact user in the same environment about a month before this malware was found there. And besides the creation of this rogue user, Tunnel Specter is also able to fingerprint the infected machine, to run arbitrary commands, and to communicate with the C2 over DNS tunneling. And as I said in the beginning, it shares a slight code similarity with the second malware, which is called Sweet Specter. And Sweet Specter is also able to fingerprint the infected machine, and it does it exact same way as Tunnel Specter does it. And it's also able to execute arbitrary commands. And when we investigated Sweet Specter, we also noticed some pretty interesting connection. We found that it has a slight code similarity with a known Ghostrat variant, which is called Sugar Ghost, discovered by Talos last year. And I think you're also going to have a session about it later. We don't believe that this connection is confidential. We think that it is possible that at least they were maybe created by the same threat actor or share the same code base. And what was interesting about this Sugar Ghost connection is that according to the researchers who discovered it, it was found targeting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Uzbekistan. And they also pointed out that it has some links to China, which of course is very interesting for us. And after gaining this additional foothold in the environment, the threat actor moved on to the next phase, which is to move laterally towards the critical assets. And to do that, the threat actor used different tools and techniques. They tried to use in-packet. They also tried to use the Samba SMB client, and of course, built-in tools to Microsoft, such as WMI, Netcommand, Task Scheduler, and WinRS. And again, I'm sure all of you are familiar with those tools and techniques since they're used by a lot of threat actors. However, our threat actor did manage to surprise us once again when they introduced us to a brand new tool. And this tool is called Yasu, and it's a new penetration toolset that was launched just about 2 months before the attack started. Yasu is a very powerful penetration toolset that kind of brings together a number of features, such as scanning, brute forcing, remote interactive shells, and other very powerful capabilities. In our specific case, as you can see on the screen, the threat actor used this tool in order to perform a sort of a brute force attack, which is called NTLM password spray attack. You can see on the right that the threat actor basically tried different combinations of server names, protocols, usernames, and passwords in order to log in remotely to different assets in the network. Okay, and now we got to perhaps the most interesting part of this investigation, and this is the data theft phase. This phase really shows us why threat actor even put a lot of time and effort to hack government in the first place. And in our specific case, it also really showed us exactly what the threat actor was looking for. Initially, the threat actor tried to steal a bunch of different files. So they moved towards different SQL servers and databases, and they ran multiple dir commands to list the different directories in each server. Then they copied files that interest them, and they copied files not only related to the system itself, such as configuration files, but they also specifically copied files that related to very sensitive geopolitical subjects. For example, files related to embassies all over the world, presidents, leaders, politicians, military information, and other very sensitive data. But besides stealing files, the threat actor really put a lot of emphasis into stealing emails. And they did it by first identify the different Exchange server in the network. Then they abused this built-in tool to Microsoft, which is called Exchange Management Shell, which I'll touch upon in just a second. And later on, they compressed or archived the different outputs or the emails and sent it back to the C2. So as I just mentioned, the threat actor abused this built-in tool to Microsoft, which is called Exchange Management Shell. This tool is a PowerShell-based command line interface that enables the operator or the user to manage administrative tasks on Exchange. And the threat actor used it in order to steal a lot of different sensitive files or emails. You can see here one example of what they were looking for. So the threat actor actually used the message subject filter and tried to search for very sensitive subjects. You can see here on the screen that the threat actor was looking for information about the United States, China, Saudi Arabia. They even searched for the China-Arab Summit, which was a very important meeting held around the same time of the attack. They also searched for information about the president of China and even his wife. They also were interested in information about the League of Arab States and even OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is also a pretty sensitive subject. And as you can see on the bottom, all those emails were exported to CSV, later compressed and sent to the C2. And our threat actor even took it one step further, where they basically targeted every email that were either sent or received from governmental email address. And as you can see on the bottom, they were specifically interested in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this interest of them in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was also observed in another method, which is to add PowerShell snap-ins of Exchange in order to manage the Exchange server and, of course, to steal emails. And the threat actor used this technique in order to steal thousands of correspondence between embassies and diplomatic missions all over the world. You can see here just a few of them, but you have here Washington, D.C., Kuwait, Ankara. You have, of course, countries in the Middle East and Africa. And overall, we found over 100 embassies that were targeted in the attack. And of course, not just embassies were targeted using this method, but also dozens of individuals working for the governments, military information, and other very sensitive mailboxes, as you can see on the screen. So overall, we understood that the motivation of the threat actor was to perform long-term espionage operation and to steal very specific and very sensitive data. And of course, when we took all of this into consideration and analyzed the data, we asked ourselves the most obvious question: who is behind this? I mean, it's not a secret that many countries would love to have their hands on such sensitive information. But in order to make an attribution, especially when you're dealing with nation-state threat actor, you still need to have a very important pieces of data. You need to know the motivation of the threat actor, which in our case we do. We know that they wanted to perform long-term espionage operation and to steal very specific sensitive data. We also need to be familiar with the techniques, the tools, and the procedures, which we kind of covered in more details in each phase of the attack lifecycle. We also need to know the victimology. So in our case, the victimology was pretty consistent. They targeted governmental entities in the Middle East and Africa. And also, we noticed an expansion recently towards Asia as well. And of course, we need to be familiar with the infrastructure and to track it. For example, this Microsoft NS1.com domain that I've showed you with the Specter family. But we're still missing a very important piece when we are dealing with nation-state threat actors. We still need to know the origin of the threat actor. So let's try to answer this question together. The first thing I like to do, especially when tracking these long-term espionage operations for quite some time, is I like to have a mapping of the infrastructure. And I personally find it very helpful for me to have some sort of a graphical representation of the infrastructure. And for that, I like using Maltigo. So I started with placing the different domains and IPs that I see the threat actor directly communicating with in the attack. Then I performed some pivoting, for example, on this certificate that I found. And I constantly kept looking for any overlaps or similarity or any connection to any other known threat actor or known attack. And this is where I found connections to no less than 6 different reports. And of course, I got very excited. I read those reports, I tried to compare TTPs, and of course, I tried to see who was behind those attacks. And some of those reports did have more of a formal attribution, and some didn't. But all of them pointed towards a single country, China. And at this point, we understood that we have an operational infrastructure that is shared among different Chinese threat actors and Chinese threat actors only. We did not find any other threat actors that using this infrastructure. But of course, we wanted to have more evidence to support this suspicion, so we had to collect additional data. And after tracking this threat actor for quite some time, I was able to aggregate and to collect a lot of different logs. And these logs actually helped me to identify different patterns of activity. So what I did is that I tried to narrow it down to what we call hands-on keyboard attack. And I found that the timeline or the time frame of this attack actually corresponds to the working hour of 9 to 5 in UTC +8, which aligned with the working hours of several Asian countries, including our suspect, China. And to even strengthen this suspicion, when I looked at the different payloads, web shells, scripts that were delivered in the attack, I found different linguistic artifacts that also kind of pointed toward China as well. As you can see here, for example, this is one of the web shells that were found in the attack. They have different debug strings and different comments in Mandarin that also related to China. So now that we have our missing piece, and of course we had more data to support this over the years, and we can move on towards making more of a formal attribution. And to make an attribution, we like to use the very known diamond model of attribution. And when we look at the infrastructure, as you may remember, we have this operational infrastructure that is shared among different Chinese threat actors. When we looked at the victimology, we have, again, very consistent victimology. We have governments in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. And when we looked at the capabilities, we have a lot of different rare techniques and malware that were used. We have this pretty uncommon technique of running in-memory VB implant. We have this completely new and undocumented Specter malware family. We have this pretty rare technique of abusing the network providers in order to steal credentials. And we have a lot of other tools and techniques that we've seen in the attack. And when we use the diamond model of attribution, we don't just use it to characterize different threat actors, but we also use it in order to rule out different connections or overlaps with known threat actors. And when we tested this diamond model of attribution with the data that we've collected, we noticed that it actually doesn't have any striking resemblance to any other known threat actor. And this is actually a very distinct activity. And this led us to assess that we're dealing here with potentially a new threat actor, which we're currently tracking as TGR STA0043. So we almost got to the end of the presentation, but before I leave some time for questions, I wanted to do like a quick recap of the findings. I mean, it is a year and a half long investigation. So our journey began with finding this really interesting activity cluster that consists of a very rare set of TTPs that kind of sets it apart from any other known threat actors. We also noticed that the threat actor is very sophisticated and very adaptive. Over and over again, we saw them trying to troubleshoot different problems on the fly and to use different tools to try to bypass different mitigation efforts. We also learned about the motivation behind this attack. And the motivation was to steal very sensitive information and, of course, to perform long-term espionage operation against governments in the Middle East and Africa, and, as I said, also Asia. We also established the connection between this attack to the Chinese Nexus through different facets, if it's the activity time frame, the linguistic artifacts, and of course the shared infrastructure that we've mentioned before. And based on all of this data, we came to a conclusion that what we are looking is a potentially a new threat group, which we track as TGR STA0043, which we believe with high certainty that they are operating on behalf of the Chinese state. And with that being said, this kind of concludes my session today. If you want to learn more about this research, just a heads up, I'm going to publish a blog about this specific case later on today, so make sure to check it out. And if you have any questions, I think we have a few minutes, and you can also just reach out to me outside. Thank you.
So we'll open up the floor for any questions.
Hi, Lior. Really nice presentation. So I have a two-part question. One is, what are some of the stealth techniques that you were able to observe during this whole campaign employed by the threat actor? And was Cortex XDR, the product that you're using, was it able to block most of the attack stages? Because you said you observed a few unique TTPs during this campaign. So even so, was XDR able to block most of the attack stages or not? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I'll start with the second questions about XDR. It always asked. So Cortex XDR did prevent a lot of the activities. I think about 70% of the activities. We also have logs about what the threat actor tried to do and failed to do. Because we're using like multi-layer protection, that knows to detect like anomalies and things that sometimes are new, like in this specific case. We know to alert it, and in many cases also to prevent it. But at the end of the day, when you are dealing with such a sophisticated threat actor, it's always this game between adversaries and defenders. So they blocked from this, they will try to come up from a different place. And also what my team does is that we test the product on like real cases, and then we improve it on the go. So we learn from it. And can you please repeat the first question? Sorry?
It was about the stealth techniques that you observed.
The stealth technique that we observed. Any specific one or just in general?
In general. So any stealth techniques are employed by the
So in the foothold phase, they did like use a lot of different tools, a lot of tools that I didn't mention here, such as like, for example, Cobalt Strike, Plugix, and other pretty common tools, and the Specter family. So this is where was their like way to establish the foothold for a long period of time. But other than that, they did use a lot of like in-memory implants, so it was not, a lot of the activity was not very stealth. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Okay, just a very simple question. So what you have presented is it demonstrates the fact that that the attack is attributed to China. Okay, but is there a possibility that the truth may not indeed be from China, but it could be like because the syndicates or whoever is behind the APT group, they know that they are definitely under investigation and they are giving you the information that you will like to know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue or the difficulty with attribution, I guess. We did encounter cases where a threat actor tried to masquerade as another threat actor. For example, Tula liked to use it a lot. But in this specific case, because we've been tracking him for like a year and a half, and we're still tracking them, it's still ongoing activity. So we kind of established or were able to see where they tried to like, fool us and when they were like the real themselves. But overall, we always use suggestive language when we speak about attribution. And also specifically with this case, because the attribution was very complex, and of course making attribution to a new threat actor is always very complex other than just making an attribution with a known threat actor. We did share this information with different federal agencies and different information security companies, and they all kind of confirmed to us the connection to China. So we are pretty certain on that. Thanks. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. So when it comes to China Nexus, typically there's 3 categories. You have the patriotic hackers out of China, the MSS, and PLA. In the China Nexus, have you guys began to go into where and which division within there they have affiliation or are having support from? Or is it so early on right now that you're still kind of wondering if it's just new kid on the block with no affiliation or working towards affiliations?
So it is, I don't know if it's very early on, but we're still gathering information about it. We don't want to make any mistakes with attribution. We did suspect maybe it's a new subgroup of an existing group. For example, this APT27 connection is pretty unclear to us at the moment. But I would say that we did not yet put it under the specific umbrella. Oh yeah, there's another one. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm a bit interested about what happened next. So as you mentioned that this is potentially a threat actor, this is quite sophisticated, and you're going to publish this today on the blog. So what usually will be happen after this kind of things when research being published? What happened next after date or week? So usually in your experience, if you can share.
So in many cases, once we publish a blog, threat actors know that they're burned. So they will try to change tactics, tools, and even infrastructure. And we see it in many cases. We still have a way to track them if we have access to the environment where they operate. So we do that. And there are a few cases that I've encountered where they were kind of feeling, I don't know, cocky, or that they can do whatever they want and they didn't change anything. So it really depends. I mean, we'll see, I guess, once we publish it, and we'll see how they respond. And if we need, we're going to publish a follow-up on this and saying that this group kind of shifted tactics or infrastructure to let everyone knows.